Hello everyone, it's Michelle Burnt here, your host of A Healthy Spirit. Welcome to another monthly episode of greatness, inspiration, and just pure positivity. We just want to spread the word of Christ nationwide, and today you're in for another treat. Please welcome Miss Christine Handy. My friend, she is a model, an author, a cancer disruptor, a speaker, a nationally recognized humanitarian, and a mother of 2 boys. And I am excited to say she is my new friend and fellow survivor, and that deserves a high five. I love
the energy.
I know, I love meeting fellow survivors that have been through cancer, but you've been through a lot more than that, and I am just so excited for our listeners to hear your inspirational story today. It has inspired me and so many, and thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so let's jump in because we have a lot to cover. So, Christine, you are a warrior with a capital W, and you've been through so much. Where did you find this strength? Where does it come from?
Well, the simple answer is God. The simple answer is the Lord. But in getting to that place, right, I was raised Christian and had a couple other illnesses prior to my breast cancer. And I wouldn't say that Christ was my strength then. I was trying to do it on my own with pride and with materialism and with trying to fit into a society. And once I was stripped away from all of that, like my beauty was gone and my hair was taken away and my health was gone, and relationally I had disruption in my life, I just said, okay, well, what is my measure and what is my ground? And it wasn't the things that was no longer valid in my life. It wasn't the relationships, because all of those things I realized can be taken away. It wasn't my modeling career, because that was taken away. And so when I was going through chemotherapy and I was doing all the introspection and trying to figure out, well, who really was this under all those veils, under all those masks that I tried so hard to put out into the world, to pretend that I was those things, I finally, when there was nothing left, right, I realized that God had to be my measure, because everything else was sinking sand. And so if my ground was stable and that was faith-based, then I had hope. Then I had a chance of survival. But if I depended on all of those earthly things, or those fleeting objects, because every time you buy something, it's suddenly old, right? You take it out of the box and you're like, God, I gotta get something new.
Yeah.
So those things didn't matter anymore. And when somebody says to you, this is your percentile chance of survival, you quickly realize that pride needs to get washed away. Doesn't matter what people think of you. What really matters is serving and giving to other people, because tomorrow is promised to nobody. And so if I can give a light and I can give hope and I can show courage today, isn't that going to fuel somebody else to maybe take that and mirror that for other people so that they can do the same thing? Yeah. So really my strength comes from Christ, but it was a lot of failures along the way. And lastly, I will say that what really helped me get to God was the earthly angels that he put in my life. It was the mountain of women that showed up for me and shored me forward and said, I will never forsake you. God will never forsake you. And at first I just didn't believe them. You know, I had 15 months of chemotherapy ahead of me and I had no idea how many surgeries, and I was like, how are you going to show up for me when I'm not even available to show up for myself? Why would you show up for me if I'm not showing up for myself? And they were like, you're going to get it someday. And so every single day somebody showed up at my house, 7 days a week for 15 months. And suddenly I was like, well, if they're going to show up for me, I better start showing up for me and figure out how to live a different life.
Yes.
And so I ultimately did. And when I was done with chemotherapy and some of the trials, of course, I've had others since, I said, well, my job is now to show up for other people in whatever capacity I have, whether it's in my modeling space or as a social media influencer, as a humanitarian, or with my children or with my community. I have to show up. And I think I'm doing that right now.
Oh, yes, you are. You're doing it very well. You know, I remember when I was diagnosed, the first things that pop in your head, and wrong, but it's true, is, am I going to die? Yes. Am I going to lose my hair? Am I going to lose my breasts? And I lost all of that. You know, you and I were talking at one point, I had no hair, no breasts, and no ovaries, and I really thought, what even makes me a woman? Right. Because I didn't understand what true beauty meant, right? And it's so much more deep down inside, but then I remember praying to Christ and him telling me, don't ever forget who you're fighting for and why. And so everything I did from that point on, all the chemo, all the radiation, all the surgeries, was for my kids and my husband.
Yeah.
And they and Christ are what got me through it and nothing else. Then I found my strength like you later. So it's like I found who I was fighting for, and through them in Christ, I found my strength.
Right.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
So on your website,
Yes.
you mentioned, I love this, there is always purpose in pain. Tell us more about that, because so many people, all of our listeners, have dealt with some sort of pain in their life, and sometimes they never find the reason or they don't understand the reason. Talk to us about that.
So, in my opinion, most of the pain that we feel is caused by love or loss. So whether it's loss in an illness or loss of love, and what I realized when I was going through treatment was that if I could show that illness wasn't necessarily a loss, and self-love was something that you could really ground into and feel less of that loss, then maybe the suffering wouldn't last so long. And maybe if I was showing that with courage, that maybe suffering in other people, they could see that and go, okay, maybe I don't have to look at the suffering this way. And so if we focus on the pain and we focus on fear, we become fearful. If we focus on hope and we focus on faith, we become hopeful and we become faithful. So really it was just retraining my brain to take all of the pain that I had gone through and said, okay, I'm going to make a message out of this mess. And I mean, these are really like cliches, right? We hear it all the time, make a message out of a mess, and fine, how do we do that, right?
Yeah.
I think it starts with self-esteem. I think it starts with digging down and figuring out who your measure is. And I am telling you right now, materialism does not work. I tried it, didn't work. I spent lots of money. It never helped me. And all those bags that I coveted, they didn't keep me warm at night going through chemotherapy. So once you just forget what the world thinks about you and society's pressures and failures and successes, then you can use your pain and use that as a fuel to help other people. And that's where the purpose comes in.
Yeah. I remember thinking, will I forget this pain? And thinking back, it's been 10 years for me.
Yeah.
I don't remember the pain, but I remember the journey. And so I think for me, sharing my story with others was why I went through that, but it also was to give me a gut check. Like Christ was like, I'm going to tell you what's really important in life, and you're going to feel it and see it for yourself. And I actually didn't realize that till after 1 year afterwards. Because you're just trying to survive. It's day by day, pick
Yes.
up your feet, go to the next appointment or surgery or whatever it may be. And then when it was all said and done, then reality set in. Then all the emotions came. And then it was like, oh my goodness, what did I just go through and how?
So let's talk about that for a second.
Yeah.
Because I think so often, I'm going to go off script.
It's all right.
I think so often people feel this kind of collateral damage after the suffering. And a lot of times the friends and the help and the gifting and the food and all of those types of gestures are gone. And so all of a sudden you have the impact of the pain and the suffering, and you
Yes.
feel more alone.
Yeah.
And I think my job by storytelling and your job by storytelling, which this podcast does, is by saying to those people, you're not alone. After the pain and after the suffering, if you feel depleted and if you feel like you're in this by yourself, we're telling you you're not. And I think that so often, so many people do feel so alone after that. So that's important to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hope you guys heard that. You are not alone, even when you feel it, even when you think you see it. There's always someone here for you. In fact, Christ is with you right now. So thank you for bringing that up, because sometimes the emotions don't hit till later. And then it all comes rushing in, and it's hard to deal with at once. It was a very emotional wreck for me. It was like it all came flooding in at once. So, totally separate topic. You went to Harvard University at the age of 50. What? Tell us about that. What encouraged you to go back? What did you go to school for?
Well, it's an interesting story because I actually did my undergrad degree in Dallas at SMU, and I just thought I was finished with school. Well, then I went through chemotherapy, and I had horrible chemo brain after chemotherapy. And I used to Google chemo brain because it was really impacting my life. My cognitive skills were challenged. My short-term memory was...
It's real.
It's so real. But if you Google chemo brain, it's a bit dismissive. And at that point in my life, I decided, you know what, I'm not really going to depend on other people to fix me. I'm going to fix me. And so I just said, and by that point, I had a really strong self-esteem. I would say that when I started chemotherapy, my self-esteem was at 0. And by the time I finished chemotherapy, I had an unstoppable self-esteem because of who I was measuring my life by. It wasn't the things anymore. It wasn't society. It was faith. And so fast forward a couple years, chemo brain's not going away, and I think to myself, okay, I'm going to have to deal with this. I have to fix this. I'm not going to go take a pill. A doctor's not going to say to me, oh, it doesn't really exist. I'm just not going to be dismissed in the medical world.
Yeah.
And so I said to myself, well, because you have a high self-esteem, and because you have an opportunity here, why don't you, I'm speaking to myself, why don't you try to apply to a school like Harvard or an Ivy League school? Well, I had nothing to lose. If they said no, I had nothing to lose. I wasn't afraid anymore of really anything. So I applied to Harvard and I got in. And I'm telling you that I worked harder than probably any student in the master's program that year. Or, well, for several years. I did it. It took me 3 years. Because of the chemo brain. Because I was basically reteaching my brain how to study, how to learn, how to read. And it ultimately helped. But the first year I was there, I reread things over and over and over again. The class materials, I had to read them over and over again. The same page over and over again because I wasn't able to focus. And so once through the program, maybe after the first year, my brain started to really be intact. And I went from driving down, after chemotherapy, driving down the street, and if there were no cars around, not sure what side of the street to turn on, what side of the street to drive on, because my short-term memory and my cognitive skills were not sound.
Right.
And so once, went through school, I was like, okay, I completely fixed this, but it took a lot of you can imagine the hard work. And unfortunately, during that time when I was going through Harvard, I had another health issue, a MRSA infection in my chest. And so I was basically in and out of the hospital for several months during COVID, not with COVID. And I was doing like my Harvard reports in front of my classroom from a hospital bed with an IV in my arm and doing my reports.
Oh my gosh, Christine.
No, and the beautiful part of the story is that the students who were in the classroom who were watching me, they were encouraged by that.
Yes.
Because I was showing courage and stamina and saying, you know what, this isn't going to stop me. This isn't going to falter what I'm trying to do for myself, and this is a setback, but it's okay, I'm going to move forward. And so I have classmates in the room watching, and years after, even like now, they'll reach out to me and say, I was faced with this. And watching you go through that during our studies made me give you lent me your courage.
Yeah.
And so we can be that for so many people just by modeling grace and courage in our own life.
Yeah, and your circumstances do not define you unless you let them. And that's
easy to let them.
Yes, it is easy, but that is one thing you can control. I remember going through cancer and just other life challenges.
Yeah.
But you feel like you have control of nothing. But there are things you do have control of. You have control over your faith. You have control over your just overday mentality. And it's okay to falter. Like some days were bad for me, but then the next day I was back being positive, and your attitude, your outlook on life. And I remember my doctors told me a lot of what healed me was just my positive outlook. Like just nothing could bring me down. So that Harvard story, I bet you really don't realize how many people you affected that weren't even in the classroom.
I hope you're right.
Oh, I love it.
I hope you're right.
Okay, so you also have wrote a book. So not only are you a cancer survivor, but your book, Walk Beside Me.
Yes.
When did you write it? Talk to us about that. And is there a movie coming out about it?
Yes.
Woo!
Yes. I wrote my book because when I was going through chemotherapy, I could not find a narrative, a novel, a story about somebody going through breast cancer. I was gifted a lot of self-help books and faith-based books, which really helped me. But I gravitated towards women who were going through the same situation, and I didn't have any contemporaries who were going through the same situation. And so I was seeking out stories all the time. Well, how did she get through it? And what happened to her? And I wanted the good, bad, and the ugly. I didn't want the highlight reels. I didn't want just the positive stuff. I wanted to know. And so I said to myself, okay, well, I have the ability. Right? I've always wanted to write, and I'm a pretty good writer. And I thought, well, if anybody can do it, I can do it. So I'm going to write the story. And so that when people are going through breast cancer, they can have a story about somebody going through it. And I'm not going to highlight all the good stuff that happened. Of course, I had a ton of people show up for me, but I put in that book really not very flattering things about me because I wanted the truth. I wanted to put the truth out into the world, because so often we try to live in this perfection and this world of judgment, and I didn't want to put out something that wasn't authentic and not true. Inauthenticity hurts people because it basically is setting people up for failure, because it's saying like I have this as this is my life, and it's really, if you're not authentic, it's not true, and people are trying to attain that life that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And so I shared a very vulnerable story, and it's being made into a film, I think, because a lot of reasons. One, the most important reason is because if you think about the films that have talked about cancer, Philadelphia, Steel Magnolias, Philadelphia is not about cancer, but it's about illness.
Yes.
If you think about all the movies that you've seen about illness, the protagonist dies. At the end of the movie, it's a sad story because the patient dies.
Point.
And I said to myself and to some people who approached me to have the film made years ago in 2017 and 18, I said, this is an important story because it's about survival and it's about thriving. And I want there to be a story, a film that shows that the protagonist, the patient, lives. We have to show hope. Why are we not showing hope in this world? Why are we not showing hope in cinema? Why are we not showing hope in TV shows, right? And so this is going to be that.
Oh, so exciting. So you just brought up something I want to talk about quick. So I'm on the board for American Cancer Society, and each year we do a walk, and there's 2 t-shirts. There's 3. There's caregiver, survivor, thriver. And a couple years ago I was like, well, what is the difference? And survivor is where you have survived a traumatic experience, and we both have.
Right.
Thriver is where you get to the point of that experience where you can live happily, healthy, and you're thriving on life. And do you realize that's to the point of life where you are at?
I mean, I talk about it all the time. There's a difference between survival and thriving, and there's also a difference between happiness and joy. And they're kind of parallel. So surviving, in my opinion, is happiness. Joy, which I get from serving, is thriving. And they're very different. They're different emotions and they're different realities.
Yeah, and that's a whole nother podcast we could do sometime. But it's like, how do you take the trauma that you've been through and just the heartaches, whether big or small, and turn those into, why did I go through that? What am I going to learn from it? And how can I take that survivalship and thrive on it later in life?
That's purpose and pain.
Yes. I just thought I'd throw that in for you. So tell us about the movie, and when will it be released?
So the movie was called Willow the Feature Film because if you look up the book, Willow is my main character.
Okay.
But now the film is called Hello Beautiful.
Okay.
And I can't even tell you why, but in the very end of the film, you'll know why. And it's funny because so many films that are based on books don't really mirror the book. They change it in such a way that you read the book and you go, that doesn't even look like the film.
Yeah.
But my book and the film are very much the same. And Ziad Hamza is the director and the screenplay writer, and he wrote in a way that is so beautiful and so compelling. And it really shows the loneliness of cancer. And it really shows the importance of people showing up during a cancer diagnosis. And it really shows all of these important aspects of cancer journeys that are important for people, not just the caregivers and not just the patients to see, but communities to see, so that they can show up for cancer patients in a way that maybe they didn't know how, right? How many times were you in a position where somebody said, well, I'd love to help you, but I didn't know what to say? You don't have to say anything. You just have to
just be there.
Just show up.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be a grandiose gift. Just show up. Send a text. I got so many texts when I was going in the chemo chair, right? Hooked up to a port, hooked up to medicine that was killing the cancer, but really brutally hurting myself as well. And if I got a text from somebody who said, okay, I don't know what to say, but I just want to know you to know that I care, that meant so much to me.
Yeah.
So just show up.
Yeah. Where did the name Willow come from? Did you come up with that?
Well, no, it's always been a nickname in my life. I've been
Really?
a model since I was 10, and it's just always been a nickname.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
So speaking of model, you have some exciting news to share. Tell us about Miami model swimsuit coming up and Victoria's Secret. Just wow.
Thank you. So when I lost my chest in 2020, so many people don't know what happened. So in 2012, I was diagnosed with breast cancer and I had a double mastectomy. But I never woke up from surgery without seeing something on my chest. I had expanders and then I had implants. Fast forward with March 15th of 2020, when the whole world shut down, March 25th of 2020, I woke up on a random Wednesday and something in my chest hurt. And I kind of ignored it, went for a walk, and came back from my walk, and it felt like a whole nest of bees were stinging my chest. So I lifted up my shirt, and my chest was on one side very, very, very bright red. So I sent pictures to my oncologist and to my surgeon, and I said, this is what's happening. And they said, go to the emergency room. I said, well, is it even open? This is March 25th of 2020. Am I allowed to go to the emergency room? Is somebody going to be there with a hazmat suit going, go home?
Right.
So they met me there because I had a real problem. And I was admitted to the hospital there for 5 days. Long story short, I went home from that experience with a nurse for 2 weeks because the infection was really dangerous and bad. But they weren't doing a lot of surgeries then because of COVID. And so fast forward a month, I ended up back in the hospital for the same thing. A month later, same thing. Ultimately, by June of 2020, my chest had to be excavated. So I technically had my third and fourth mastectomies. Talk about trauma. I was like, okay, I've had enough. So when I woke up from that surgery, I'll never forget it. I was in the recovery room and I was in so much pain. I was in such grotesque pain because they really dug me out like a carved pumpkin. The infection was awful. I lost so much skin even from it. And I woke up after surgery and I just was like trying to feel like what my reality was. And I put it was swollen and I put a little pressure on it. And I felt like saying, I asked my body, I said, what else are you going to take next? How are you going to fail me again? And I was really frustrated and mad. And several months later, I woke up one day after the physical pain was gone and after the emotional pain was settling in. And I said to myself, I have to go back to modeling. Because if I have a huge community of people that are supporting me, if I have an online presence where people are like encouraging me, and I have a family that is adoring me and helping me through this process, what about the women out there who don't have that? Who's helping them? Who's showing them that my beauty isn't dissected because I lost my breast? Who's showing them in the world that losing your chest doesn't define their beauty? And I said I have to. So my manager and I got in touch with Victoria's Secret. Ultimately, they hired me to be a breastless model for them. And I started to do runway. I did New York Fashion Week. I've done Miami Swim Week. Now this is my second year. And so I just felt like I had to use all of my platforms, whether it was my career or my speaking or my book or the film or whatever it was, modeling. I had to help people and inspire people and give them hope in any capacity that I could. And so if I could take that pain of losing my chest, again, that's purpose and pain. I had an obligation to use that part of the pain.
God is within you. God is good. And
it's exhausting.
He is within you. And all I can say is wow. And this podcast just became even more personal because I too was diagnosed in 2012. So I did not know we were the same year. I was February 24th.
October 1st. So it was like a sick joke because October 1st is the first day of Breast Cancer Awareness Month. So like for the entire month, I'm looking at pink going, please don't, I don't even want to see it.
Right?
So, yeah.
So you didn't know you'd leave today being my new best friend.
I did.
So let's talk about advice because there's so many things we could share with people, but I think, just in general, we're talking about women empowerment and fighting hard and finding out what you're fighting for.
Right.
For me, put one foot in front of the other and you don't give up. God will tell you when the fight is over, and when you are weak, He is strong. And so I'm sure you have a lot of advice, but what would you share with someone who's struggling and thinking they could never be the Wonder Woman that you are today?
Well, I think that comes from self-esteem. And when I had a very low self-esteem, I made very poor decisions. And I made poor decisions relationally, in business, and when I rebuilt my self-esteem on faith, my self-esteem was unstoppable. Nothing could sway that. No accolades in life and no no failures. Like I wasn't clinging to, oh my gosh, I'm a Victoria's Secret model. That wasn't a measure for me in my life. All I knew was that I needed to inspire people. And so if we cling on to things that can rattle our self-esteem, then we're in a compromised position. And so if I have a solid ground and I don't care about society's accolades, which is winning an award or being a model for Victoria's Secret, if that really isn't like something that I hold tight to, because it's an inspiration to people, that's all I care about. And I don't care about the people that criticize me, right? I had one guy on social media say to me, or more than one, were you born a man or a woman after I lost my chest? So if I just wipe the highs and the lows out, I'm just on solid ground. And so if you can if you can build your self-esteem on something that is measurable and something that is strong, and for me that is faith, then it's not quicksand. And once you have a solid self-esteem, then you can make valid and good decisions. Good decision making affects the rest of your life. So that's one piece of advice. Work on your self-care and your self-love. And it's a long process and it takes a lot of introspection, but it can be done. The second thing is, what I do is I let go of the outcome. And so the first month of my chemotherapy, there was so much fear and so much dread and so much worry, right? Worry has never added a second to our lives. But I was stuck in that. I was totally paralyzed emotionally.
It's hard not to.
I was totally paralyzed emotionally. And I was not being a vine, I was being a victim. Like, why me? And I'm only 41 and I don't have a family history of it. Well, why? I mean, why not me? Why was I immune to getting illness? I wasn't. None of us are. And so you got to get rid of, so let me go on. When I stopped worrying about whether I was going to live or die or what was going to happen the next day, I just let it go. And I just said, okay, I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, but I know that I'm going to show courage today. One, for myself, because I needed to rebuild my self-esteem. And when I was being a victim, that wasn't helping my self-esteem. It was completely slicing it. And so, secondly, I was showing courage for my children. And then, even more than that, I was showing courage to the community of women who were also going through it, or just the community in general. And so I was encouraging my friends. I was showing courage for my friends and my family. And it wasn't fake. It wasn't like, oh, I'm strong and I have all this strength. I was just saying, okay, I'm going to keep trying. And it may not look very pretty, but I'm going to keep trying. And so when you get rid of the outcome, then you're not fixated on whether you're going to live or die, because it's out of your control.
Yeah.
And if I could, whatever's going to happen is going to happen.
Yeah.
You're either going to show fear or courage.
It's already written.
Take a pick. Take your pick. And so when I got rid of the outcome, it was freeing. And it gave me the foundation to do whatever that I needed to do in life, because it wasn't holding me back. That fear wasn't holding me back anymore.
I saw a quote, I think it was on Instagram or Facebook, and it said, why are you worrying about tomorrow when you haven't gotten through today yet? And it's just so easy and simple, but yet I had to read it a couple times, and I'm like, it's so right. We're worried about, but what about tomorrow? And what about next week? And oh my gosh, next year, when are you even enjoying today? How are you going to get through today?
Right.
And so it's like that live in the now moment. Each of our podcasts, we have all different guests, and we always have gut checks in the middle of the podcast. And you just brought up, I think the perfect one is, what is your foundation set on? What is it built on? And that's hard, right? Even for myself. I mean, I'm thinking right now, I have some materialistic things I need to give up, and that's reality. But we have to be able to stop and think, are we built on a solid foundation? Could it use some fine tuning and tweaking, just like anything in life? If Christ were to judge us right now, is our foundation built on the Bible as it should be? So, I encourage you to take some time and just kind of meditate on that and pray on it. Are you proud of your foundation that your life is built upon? And that's a hard gut check for some.
Well, and do not fear is written 365 times in the Bible. Why? There's 365 days a year. Do not fear every day. It's not a coincidence.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, so speaking of emotion, we kind of already talked about this, but I want to dive into a little bit more. You had 4 bilateral mastectomies?
Yes.
Okay, so I only had one.
Sounds really weird.
I know. I can't even hold a candle to that, but what I can agree with you on is the emotions that go with it. But just surgeries in general can be very hard for people. Losing your hair during chemo, and this is for any man or woman. Surgeries, depending on what happens to your body, there is so much emotion that goes with that, because sometimes literally a piece of your body is gone. How does one begin to deal with those emotions, and did you have any tricks of the trade that you used, or where do you begin?
Well, again, if my measure was society, then I really would listen to those people saying, were you born a man or a woman because you have no chest? And I really would be paying attention to what other people thought of me, because that would be my measure. Because my measure is not from this world or society, and my measure is my faith and my God, I'm perfectly and wonderfully made. And if this is what I'm meant to look like right now, this is what I'm meant to look like. But I'm not meant to look like this and hide and cover. I'm not meant to look like this and wear, in my opinion, for me, wear a prosthetic that shows something that's not. I'm going to show who I am. I'm trying not to use filters, but I do like them sometimes, but I'm trying just to be me. Every single day I'm gonna show up as me, and if people don't like it, it's okay. And so I think that has to be, you have to figure out who your measure is, and that's where your foundation is built on.
So good. And I think just taking a look in the mirror and being proud of who you are, because God is proud of you. You're so right. You are exactly, Christine, who he made you to be. He knew this would happen. And as hard as it was, look at you now. I mean, you're on top of the world. You're thriving. You and I were talking, and I always say when you go through cancer or any hard thing in life, there's two lives. There's the life before cancer that your parents gave you, and there's the life after cancer that Christ gave you. And for me, the second life was so much better and more meaningful than the first.
Well, I like, in lay terms, so to speak, I like to talk about that. I feel like pre-cancer, I had to build a house, right? And I had to build a foundation. I had to build a life.
Yeah.
During treatment, I had to build a different house. And it was kind of broken in places, and the white fence was gone, and things like that. And then after cancer, I had to build a different house. But so often people think that the different house has to be decrepit, and it can't look like the first house. Why can't it be better than the first house? Why can't it be different and be better? And so I like to talk to people about just build a different house. It's not the same. Life has changed. That's okay.
Yes.
But build it exactly the way you want it.
Yes.
And I think people can understand that.
Yeah, change isn't always fun, but that doesn't mean it's not necessary. Yeah. And so I have learned, for me, to embrace change and thrive on it. I love change. And people think that's so weird, but change is good. It keeps the life spicy. So I think that's really important to talk about. And one thing I want to point out is a lot of you may hear our stories and think, gosh, they've got it together. They're so happy. They've got a great life. But what you don't know is what happens behind the scenes and what we went through and the emotional trauma that goes through it. And I just want to point out that it is okay not to be okay. And we've been there, done that. There were days I was mad at Christ. There were days I didn't want to pray because I didn't think the prayers would work. There was days that I just was mad at the world and I was full of hatred. It is okay not to be okay as long as the next day you pick up the pieces and you keep moving. And so we may look like we have it all together. I can assure you I do not. But we're happy because we're alive. That's all I can do to sum it up. And so I just want to point out that although you see smiles on her face, every day is not perfect.
Yes. Well, there is no perfect.
Right?
It doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist except for in heaven. And sometimes even 10 years later, the pain will still bring up memories. And even hearing your story brings up so much that I try not to think about. But sometimes it's good to feel the pain because it puts you back in perspective and reality. We need that.
Yes.
Okay, so I did my research. I was watching all your interviews. I just love it. There was one you did on TV, and you said your obstacles do not define you, and beauty cannot be rinsed off. I completely agree with you, 1,000%. But what about social media can we change? Because social media says different than that. So what can we do to change social media, adapt to it, maybe get rid of it completely? What do you think?
Well, social media mirrors society. It just does. Like, people are enamored with Bravo TV. Why? Because it's women fighting with each other. And they get some sort of something out of that. My life and I model grace, and I model mercy, especially for myself first, right? And that's the opposite. I talk about Bravo TV a lot in my interviews. I'm sorry, Bravo, but it's just the truth. I think women tearing each other apart is a bad message. And so going back to social media is infestation of comparison, right? And now we've added filters to make comparison even worse, because people look at a perfect life and a perfect body and a perfect beach and a perfect mountain, and they go, well, I can't have that. I don't have the money, I don't have the resources, I don't have the body, I don't have the job, whatever it is. And that part of social media I despise. I happen to be on all social medias because it's my job, and I try to inspire people. I strongly suggest, especially to younger women, pick apart who you're following. If you're following people whose job is just to post a pretty picture, you might want to take those off your feed. If you're following people that are there to inspire you, you might want to add more of those people.
Yeah.
It really is like, it's like going to the grocery store and picking out vegetables and fruits versus toxic, different types of foods, right? It's a choice. So go through your feed and figure out who's nurturing you, who's cheering you on, who's engaged with you in a healthy way. And if you're following people that are making you feel bad about yourself, unfollow them immediately. Now, I do always talk about this too, because prior to cancer, I felt like I didn't have a voice. I felt like, oh, I'm just a model. Because people used to tell me that when I was like in my 20s and modeling was my only job. People used to say to me, oh yeah, she's just a model. And that was dismissive of being a model. I think modeling is an incredible career. I love it. I still do it. It can have a lot of purpose, which I shared. But if you have voices in your head that are saying, you're just this, or that you're not good enough because of that, and that's also, what you're listening to on social media, take those people out of it also, but go into your life and think about, what are you watching on TV? What are you watching? What are you listening to? Is it faith-based music? Is it rap? Is it stuff is tearing you down and is making you into this life of trying to compare yourself to other people or judging? And so it really is everybody's responsibility, and we all actually do have a voice. And when you get your self-esteem straight and you get your self-esteem on solid ground, you will understand that you have a voice. And although I don't think I can change social media, I think that more people talk about the toxicity of social media, the more people do take away certain people in their feed, the healthier it can become.
Yeah, you got my mind spinning, because how many of us are guilty of this? You wake up in the morning and you're just trying to get out of bed, stretch, and wake yourself up, and you start scrolling through social media. It's the first thing you do every morning. I'm a little bit guilty, yeah. I'll admit that. And you also hear that the first thing you do in the morning determines your day. And so if you're scrolling, seeing all this negativity, what does that say about the day you're about to have? So you just bring up such a great point. That is one thing we can control, our social media, what we privy ourselves to and what we scroll through and see. What a great way to start your day, if it's just positivity, embracing, and encouragement.
Well, our minds tend to go back to the negative in general. That's just a human condition. So if we're feeding that negativity, then it's going to perpetuate the situation going on in your own head. So I don't follow anybody that is toxic. I just don't. If you look at how many people follow me and versus who I follow, it's very few people, because I just don't want to be fed a narrative that it doesn't exist. And so when I turn on my social media, it's people that really do inspire me. And what I'm feeding my soul, I become. So if I'm feeding it crap, I become that, right? If I feed it wholesome, nurturing things and people and inspiration and hope, then that's what I'm going to feel.
Yeah, you are who you hang around. Yeah.
Yes, and what you listen to.
Yes. So I could talk to you all day. But as we start to wrap up, I want to go back to one thing you said earlier, because I've really thought a lot about this over the past week. When we focus on fear, we become fearful. When we focus on faith, we become optimistic and wholesome and just pure goodness. How do you keep your mind, spirit, and soul healthy?
Well, I think it's a lot of things. I keep my self-esteem whole, because I know who my measure is. That's first and foremost. And so when I'm comparing myself to, at the end of the day, and I say to myself, okay, did I do my job? I'm not talking to somebody else. I'm talking to God. God, did I do my job today? And if I feel like I've done a good job because he's my measure, then I feel whole. If I feel like I've just kind of wasted my time and not helped anybody or inspired anybody or given hope and been more self-serving, then I don't feel like I've given anything, right? And on those days, I'm not fostering hope. I'm fostering selfish, right? And I'm fostering society. I don't want to do that. And so anytime I have a day like that where it's more self-serving, I quickly refocus and I focus on serving and I focus on inspiring and I focus on hope, because I don't want to go back into that. I know I'm fragile in that way because I lived like that for 40 years. I don't want to go back into that space. And so I can completely turn it around now, but it takes a lot of introspection. It takes a lot of, really getting to understand yourself and your triggers and what you do depend on. And for me, the materialistic part, it's not an anchor anymore. It was a false idol in my life. I don't care about it at all. I have pretty things, but that's not what I measure my life by. And so I know that is a little fragility with me, right? And so I know that I won't go back into the space because it's a focus. I say to myself, that stuff doesn't matter. And I make sure that I say that. And so once you refocus your brain on things that matter and hope, then you just won't go back to that.
Yeah. Wouldn't life be so much easier if we realized you only have one person to impress in life, and that's Christ? I mean, the first thing we think all the time is, oh my gosh, I care what they think, and what if they think that, and oh my gosh, I'm disappointing people. When in reality, all that matters is what Christ thinks of you at the end of the day.
Well, those are prisons. That's a shackle, right? If we care so much about what other people think, that's just like, I speak in prisons. And when I go into the prison, oftentimes they will look at me like, what does this middle-aged woman have, what's she going to tell us that's going to give us hope? And I talk about shackles. I talk about, you can be in a prison within those walls, or you can be outside in a prison in your own paralysis and fear of what other people think. Yeah. What's the difference? There are people in the prison system that are helping other people. I'm talking about prisoners that are inspiring and giving people hope within those walls. And part of it's because they have people who come there and share, hope and God. They show up and they say, no, you guys can be doing this within these walls until you come out back into society. And so I think that we can do it anywhere, and we can all feel paralysis in lots of different places in our life. It's our responsibility to get us out of that paralysis.
Yes. Well, I can't thank you enough. You've inspired all of us, especially me, and you remind me as a survivor that I'm meant to be on this earth for a reason and to fulfill my purpose. And so you've given me a high totem pole to follow, my friend. I'm like, I need to go out there and make more of a difference, but that's why we're here. We are here to be tested. We are here to make our faith stronger in the end goal of growing closer to Christ. And so thank you for sharing your story. What you've been through it's tough, but it's encouraging because you have shown the listeners today that anything is possible, and all these things you've been through did not define you. They changed you and molded you for something better, and that's Christ. When you allow him to show up, look what happens. Magic.
Yes.
And so your life is full of it. When we have our guests on, they always share a verse that they think will just encourage people, get them really thinking about life, or just in general how to grow closer in their relationship with God. Do you have one you want to share with us?
Yes, I love Proverbs 3:5-6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding, but in all ways submit to God, and he will guard your paths.
And he already knows your path. So why worry about a path that's already been set in stone?
Yes.
Love it. Well, thank you so much. From the bottom of my heart, I know that you flew into town just to meet with us, which makes me love you even more. So you've been a joy, and thank you for all you do for others.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for another monthly episode. We can't thank you guys enough for always joining us and just spreading the word of Christ and positivity wherever we go. Until next time, God bless.